Let's dive right into the very first chapter of the New Testament. We're going to uncover what might be a 2,000-year-old mistake, or just maybe a brilliant hidden message. It's a puzzle, really, full of missing numbers and secret meanings, all tucked away in the family tree of Jesus, as recorded by Matthew.
So you open up the Gospel of Matthew, and right there at the start is this super detailed family tree, tracing Jesus' line all the way back to Abraham. It's laid out like this perfect, structured list. But, for centuries, people have noticed something odd, a pretty glaring math error hiding in plain sight.
Okay, here's the deal, plain and simple. Matthew chapter 1, verse 17 says the whole genealogy is made up of 3 sets of 14 generations. 14 plus 14 plus 14, that's 42. Easy enough, right? But then, when you actually go and count the names listed from Abraham to Jesus, you only get 41. One is just gone. So what on earth happened?
To get to the bottom of this, we have to look a little closer at how Matthew actually put this family tree together. See, he wasn't just listing names for the sake of it. He was crafting a story with a very specific point. So let's break down that structure.
You see, Matthew splits the whole lineage into these 3 distinct chunks of Israel's history. The first group, going from Abraham all the way to King David, is pretty straightforward. No real issues there. But the trouble really starts in the next 2 groups. That's where the whole idea of a perfect, unbroken bloodline starts to fall apart.
So, where did that missing generation go? As we dig in, we find out the problem is actually bigger than just one missing name. The entire structure seems to care less about a literal head count and a lot more about something else. And this is where it gets really interesting.
That second group, the line of kings, this is where it gets messy. Forget the one missing person in the final count for a second. Historians know that Matthew intentionally left out at least 4 other kings from this list. On top of that, the royal succession was anything but clean. It was packed with coups and assassinations and power grabs. So trying to argue for a simple, pure father-to-son bloodline, it gets pretty tough to defend.
And that leaves us with this, -1, a missing person, a hole in the story. Was this just a typo, a 2,000-year-old clerical error that nobody ever bothered to fix? Or, and this is the big question, what if the error isn't an error at all? What if it's the clue?
This is where we have to totally flip our perspective. What if we've been trying to solve the wrong puzzle this whole time? The idea here is that instead of reading this as a literal physical family tree, Matthew is actually challenging us to see it through a completely different lens.
And this contrast gets right to the heart of it. On one hand, you've got a physical genealogy. It's all about blood, DNA, who your father was. But on the other hand, you have this idea of a spiritual genealogy, which is based on a connection of faith. The argument is that while the Old Testament often zeroes in on that physical lineage, the New Testament is signaling a massive pivot towards a spiritual way of seeing things.
So what even is a spiritual genealogy? Well, if you look at the Apostle Paul's letters, he often calls the people he mentors his children born of the gospel. It's a family tree not of blood, but of belief, of spiritual inheritance. And here's the kicker. This isn't some modern interpretation. It's a concept you can find right there in the New Testament itself.
This is the key that unlocks the whole puzzle. By putting a deliberately flawed family tree right at the very beginning, Matthew is practically yelling at the reader, "Hey, pay attention. The old way of thinking is changing. You've got to start looking for a deeper, spiritual meaning in what you're reading."
And this whole shift from the physical to the spiritual, it's not a one-off trick just for the genealogy. It's a central theme that runs through the entire New Testament. One of the best examples of this is how it talks about the temple.
And it's the exact same pattern we saw with the genealogy. You have 2 ways of understanding the temple. First, there's the physical temple in Jerusalem, a literal building made of stone, something made by hands. But then the New Testament drops this radical new idea, a spiritual temple, something not made by hands, which is the body of Christ or the body of a believer.
I mean, Jesus says it himself right here. When he talks about destroying the temple and raising it in 3 days, the gospel writer makes it crystal clear he wasn't talking about the stone building. He was talking about the temple of his own body. It's a total redefinition of a core physical idea into something spiritual.
So the Gospels themselves can be seen as something more than just the history of things that happened to Jesus. You can see them as a record of a spiritual reality, the story of God's Spirit working and living inside of a human being. It's an inside story being told on the outside.
Okay, so let's zoom out to the bigger picture. What's the real takeaway here?
Why does this shift from a literal to a spiritual reading actually matter so much?
Let's put all the pieces together. We saw how those so-called errors in Matthew's genealogy aren't mistakes at all. They're deliberate clues pointing to a deeper truth. We figured out that truth is about a spiritual lineage, a family of faith, not just blood. Then we saw that same exact pattern with the temple, redefining it as something spiritual. It all points to one huge conclusion. The New Testament is inviting us into a whole new way of reading, asking us to shift our focus from the purely literal to the deeply spiritual.
And that brings us to one last, really powerful question. If the very first chapter of the New Testament is designed to make us shift our entire perspective, what else have we been reading literally, all while missing a deeper spiritual meaning that's been waiting there the whole time?